South Africans would also know you as a statistician in a case that involved GEMS, MedScheme, and Discovery Health in 2019, where you were an expert statistician, and there was a case of fraud, waste, and abuse, and not so much a finding, but a sense that up to 3.4 to 3.8 times the amount of people of color were investigated for fraud, waste, and abuse, as opposed to white practitioners.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that case.
Yeah, so I was brought on board by the panel because they were asked...
Wim Trengrove and I can't remember her name now.
Melissa...
Yeah.
Kutsia, I think. Yeah, from WITS. So the three lawyers on the panel brought me on board, and they asked, well, they've been posed the question, is this fraud, waste, and abuse being run in a racially discriminatory manner? And I was given access to quite a lot of data from the three organizations involved and asked to answer that question. And so, that is a difficult question to answer. You're asking an institution, are you acting in a racially discriminatory manner? And of course, they're going to say, no, of course, we only employ the best people, and we have systems in place to identify when things are going wrong, etc., etc. So all I could really tell the panel was, I can't look into the minds of what people do. I can't explore their motives. I can only explore the end result. And in a world which is race blind, or in which there's no discrimination, you ought to find that there would be no difference between the rates of fraud between black and white practitioners. And if there is a difference, then you have to try and think about what the possible explanations were. And my argument was really that in a country with hundreds of years of experience of racially discriminatory laws and practices, that if you did end up finding that there was a difference in the way people are treated, it would be absurd not to believe that this was linked to that history of racial discrimination. I was able to, I think, it was quite satisfying to be able to look at the data, analyze the data, and come up with that answer for the panel. The question, of whether that was deliberate or simply an artifact of the way our systems are racialized in general, is something that I think, I suggested needed further investigation.
I read some comments where comments were allowed on certain sites, and they were pretty racially directed.
Yes, I have a sort of rule never to read the comments, and I broke that rule that once. And those were quite disturbing comments. Absolutely. What was the final outcome? Because I read some of the kind of the 2 pages that the medical aid schemes themselves had to say about what had happened, but what ultimately was the desired outcome? Was them to kind of introspectively look at themselves and their... I think there was a case that there was clearly something wrong. That no one could step back and say, this is the way the system ought to operate. And if there was something wrong, I believe the medical aid schemes had a duty to investigate themselves and to deal with that issue. And if they really believed there was nothing wrong, to do everything in their power to say, how can we prevent this sort of outcome? Because you're faced with this, unpleasant choice. If you dug below the line on these stories, this outcome is because black people are just more likely to commit crimes, or this outcome is because there's something wrong in the way the system is being applied. And anyone who then falls on the side of these outcomes are because black people are just more inclined to criminality, well then, you've answered your own question about whether this is a racially based system or not.
Absolutely. How long have you been with the foundation now?
I've been with the foundation since about 2018. So it's about 7 years. Yeah.
And that's kind of a role of permanency, as away from almost being, consulted and being brought into certain cases from time to time.
Yes.
So, what do you hope to achieve from the foundation's point of view?
So we can see that we've done quite well in maintaining our democracy, but we can see that there are headwinds. I mean, an example that's occupied our mind in the foundation recently, and many of our partners, is the actions of Operation Dudula. Here you have a vigilante organization camping outside clinics and deciding who gets in or not. You get in if you have a South African ID, and if you don't, you get chased away. And this is not part of the clinic's policies. This is not part of our government's policies. These are private individuals taking the law into their own hands. And what we have is the police and the health authorities standing by, hands in pockets, saying, well, it's very bad. It's possibly very bad, but not doing anything about it.
We're not going to intervene.
Yeah, and that is a fundamental breakdown in law. And it doesn't take, a huge imagination to see where this thing leads. Today they're keeping away foreigners.
Tomorrow, are you a real South African?
Tomorrow, a real South African, and the day after, maybe you need to pay a small consideration before you get into the clinic.
Yeah.
And we seem to have this two-tier application of the law. If someone senior, a government official or politician, and you get accused of a crime, you get all the opportunities to protest your innocence. You can make representations to the National Director of Public Prosecutions. You say, well, I think I've been falsely accused.
It's been a very, very long time in court.
Yes.
Many years.
And then, you can tie the system up in knots, but the system gives you every opportunity. You may have committed very serious crimes. You've stolen hundreds of millions of rand. You've caused huge damage to our service delivery. At the same time, out in Stilfontein, you get some miners doing some artisanal mining, and the reaction of the police is, we'll starve them to death. Due process is only for certain people. Everyone else gets the boot. And that, I think, is a very disturbing way in which our rule of law is being applied. And that's... So, what we'd like to achieve, I think, is a society that is fairer and lives by the rule of law. But I think, as I say, although we haven't lost our democracy, there are signs that are flashing about the way in which our laws are applied.